Hello and welcome to India's World. A new economic bloc, the Eurasian Economic Union or the EEU, formally came into being on this New Year's Day. The new bloc includes Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus and Armenia. Kyrgyzstan is expected to join it by May 2015. The Eurasian Economic Union is the final outcome of a process which began as a customs union in 2010 between Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan, and then transformed itself into a single economic space in 2012 to integrate trade, energy, industry and transport in the region. The EEU will have free movement of goods, services and labour, and like the EU, the European Union, will have its own bureaucratic structure. To discuss the long-term consequences of the formation of the Eurasian Economic Union, we have with us three very distinguished experts. We have with us Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, one of India's most distinguished diplomats. He's been India's ambassador to Russia, France, Turkey and Egypt, and also the Foreign Secretary of India. He is now an outspoken commentator on India's foreign policy. We have Ambassador Ajay Molotra. He's a former Indian ambassador to Russia. He's represented India at the UN, was also ambassador to Romania and Kuwait, and a familiar figure on the show. And we have with us my old friend, Professor Manoj Pant, an eminent economist and expert on international trade. He's professor at the Center for International Trade and Development at Delhi Jawaharlal Nehru University. I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ambassador Sibal, let me begin with you. Do you think the creation of the Eurasian Economic Union is a countermeasure against the Americans and the European attempts to isolate Russia?
No, I think that's not strictly the case, because Russia has obviously wanted all these years to integrate the former states of the Soviet Union into one economic and political bloc. And from my point of view, this was a legitimate aspiration of Russia, because there's so many things that tie these countries together, because they're part of one single country and there are ethnic, linguistic, economic, cultural, and all sorts of links. The West, however, has seen this as a project to consolidate Russia's hegemony over the erstwhile Soviet space, and have opposed it right from the beginning, with Secretary Hillary Clinton saying publicly that they'll do everything possible to prevent the EU from coming into being, etc., etc. Yes, in one sense also it is a riposte of Russia to the European Union, because Putin tried very hard in the initial years to develop some kind of an understanding with the European Union in one common economic space from Vladivostok to Lisbon. But all his efforts have failed, and therefore he decided to launch this project in order to strengthen his hands vis-à-vis the European Union, and also then create a separate bloc where Russia would be able to generate synergies which will help in the overall development of the region and also strengthen Russia's strategic hand.
Mr. Molotra, so given what Mr. Sibal is saying, this Eurasian economic space, will it initially rival the European Union and maybe then negotiate with EU? Or should we believe the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister who said that the whole idea is to have close relations with EU so that you have a free economic zone from the Atlantic to the Pacific ultimately?
Well, as Ambassador Sibal mentioned, the vision they've had all along has been more inclined towards Europe, but when that hadn't worked out, they are still looking for opportunities to cooperate with Europe. And this common economic space that has been spoken of from Lisbon to Vladivostok, they have very much that in mind. Certainly from the view of Western commentators, that is not very helpful, because you are kind of putting a knife into the center of the transatlantic alliance, which from an American viewpoint is not the right way to go ahead. But as to what it means, even the EU took a long time coming. You remember it started as a coal and steel community, and then in the 57, and then moved on. Up here also, it's not as if suddenly it'll be such a powerful organization that can then, start exerting its weight internationally. What the founders would like to do is certainly to see that it cooperates with the EU, if that is at all possible. But and that is why they wanted Ukraine to be a part of this, because like when you started off the European Union, you had up there Germany and as a counterbalance France. Up here you needed somebody, otherwise it looks like Russia with a few small states attached to it. It would be the EU if you had Germany with the Benelux countries only out there to start it off, it would really be one powerful country with a few small ones around it. So it has got some way to go, but it is a beginning. I think they still have to rationalize all that they're doing themselves before they can proceed any further.
Professor Pant, what are the possibilities of the Eurasian Economic Union for economic cooperation and development of the region?
You mean of the Eurasian?
Eurasian.
Well, see, it's like this. The dependence of these countries in terms of economics on Soviet Union is only one, really, and that is energy. You know, whether you take Ukraine or whether you take Belarus or you go further down, even the Chechnya area, everyone needs the Russian gas. You know, heating is a serious issue. So, barring energy, there's no serious need for these countries for the Russians, except there is a very important umbilical cord link, right? And if you actually visit places like Belarus and all, which I have, there's a very strong group. The younger people want to move to the West. And the Eastern ones, the older ones think it's still a good thing, Soviet Union is still a good place. So I don't think there's something very new about this, you know. Even historically, areas have broken up and joined again. And after all, even the EU movement from 15 to 27 was the issue of security issue in the East. And same way the Soviet Union broke up in 91, now they're trying to get some of the people together. Is it a serious economic consequence? I don't think so. You know, it's a very limited, given the nature of Russia's trade too. I don't think there's major economic partnership. I think it's an important political partnership.
May I give a slightly different view on this? I think in addition to energy, which of course is at the core of Russia's relations with not only its neighbors in this space but also in the European Union, there is this whole issue of immigrants or workers and the remittances, and most of the exports of these countries and the very little to export are tied up to the Russian market because they're not internationally competitive. Ukraine, for example, is not part of this, but it's actually so closely tied to Russia that if Russia was to cut all links with Ukraine, there will be a huge immediate crisis in Ukraine. Similarly, in the case of other countries, whatever they sell, it is for the Russian market. So there are all these links also, and there's not much choice before them in terms of politically, yes, they can turn towards the European Union, use that as a counter against Russian power and Russian hegemony, as some of our neighbors do by bringing China in or whatever. But at the end of the day, their links to the Russian market and the Russian economy are very strong.
Ambassador Molotra, then, was this a propitious time to launch the Eurasian Economic Union, given the condition of the Russian economy, given the fact that the ruble lost 40% in 1 year, and the remittances link in Belarus, the value of the remittances went down by 50%. In Kazakhstan, it went down by 30 to 40%. So why would they risk everything and join the Eurasian Union at a time like this?
Well, this is not something that has suddenly appeared out of the blue. If you remember, President Nazarbayev proposed it in 1994 when he spoke in Moscow at the Moscow State Institute for International Relations. And in that sense, it is not even a Russian initiative. Because it also predates Putin, but the Russians latched onto it in 2011 when they saw they weren't getting very far with this common economic space with the West Europeans, with the EU, and decided that you have to move in parallel, and it's a sensible thing to do. At this moment, I think if they were not to announce it now, that would be the end of the whole thing. And since they'd announced it well in advance, they signed the agreement in May itself, and it took some time to be ratified by the legislatures of each country. And since then, they've also got Armenia on board, who joined the following day, and Kyrgyzstan joins on the 1st of May. And I think soon you would have, at some stage, Tajikistan also joining in. There are disputes between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan over the border, which once that gets sorted out, I think would happen. And as Ambassador Sibal pointed out, one reason for that, for example, in Tajikistan, 50% of the money that comes in is remittances of Tajiks working in Russia. And this union will combine, as they call it, the 4 freedoms. Free movement of goods, of people, of services and capital. Okay. Now, for many of these republics which are not well off, and Tajikistan being the poorest, free movement of people is hugely important, and migration is also an issue.
So time is propitious, you're saying?
Well, For Russia, I guess it's propitious because
And for others, there's no choice.
for others, yes, I guess there's not much of a choice. It may not be propitious in the sense that right now is the best time, but it would have been really putting a full stop to it if you had decided to change the date.
I'm going to come back to you, but we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the formation of the Eurasian Economic Union and its long-term consequences. Well, Sibal, you wanted to say something before we went on the break.
Run on the ruble, to my mind, was engineered deliberately. Not only because the Eurasian Economic Union was going to be announced on 1st January, but there were other larger reasons to squeeze Russia. But I'm sure this was one of the elements that whoever was behind the run on the ruble had in mind in order to demonstrate the fragility of this Eurasian Economic Union.
And they managed to do it?
Well, for the time being, yes, in the sense that it has raised question marks about the Russian economy and its growth and its stability and everything else, but this is a passing phase.
So, Professor Pant, do you think that integration with the Russian economy will bring both risks and rewards to the members of the Eurasian Union? What are the risks and what are the rewards?
Well, the rewards were mainly, as I said, I will reiterate, I disagree with what the earlier people said. I still believe that energy is a very crucial issue. In the
But so are remittances.
No, wait, I'll come to that. Remittances come only after you go to work.
all the energy
But wait a minute. Remember, this immigration issue was important not only for these countries, but for many of the other European countries, actually went to the Western Bloc. So it's the question of what we say in the Hindi, main idhar jaunga, udhar jaunga. That's still going on, by the way. There's a whole debate out in Belarus whether we should move towards the European Union or whether, even despite all this. So part of the problem, let me comment separately on the two issues. First of all, what is a customs union? A customs union is typically a ratification of what was already existing volume of trade between countries. The labor movement is something which is nothing new. People of Belarus have been free to go to Russia for many years now. They've had no need for visa and they moved. So that's nothing very new, just ratification of what is already there on the ground. It's nothing very new. It's an important political move. And I'm stressing that. It's not an important economic view from the point of view of the fact that, look at Russia's, if you can comment on Russia's own pattern of trade. Their largest partner is the EU 27, right? More than 50% trade with the EU. They have a surplus of about 100 billion, I remember, a little less, maybe 89 billion in 2012 and 13 with the EU. All because of oil. And I'm not looking at the new prices. I don't know what the 2014 is. If you take away the oil, there's nothing that the Russians export. Almost nothing, barring oil, if you take it away. What do they import? Look at the import structure. Machinery, some of it required for the exploration of oil in the north, which will now decline. Then chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and I'm sure you will see it reflecting on the ground in terms of availability of consumer goods. The problem with the Russian economy is, world does not live by politics alone. I know both of my fellow speakers are, diplomats, but you don't no longer live by politics alone. Where is the consumer good base of the Soviet Union? That's what's going to be the big problem for the Russians. So I don't see it such a great enduring.
Ambassador Molotra, does the success of the Eurasian Economic Union therefore depend upon the condition of the Russian economy and how Russia manages its economy, how it builds its consumer base or manufacturing base? So everything depends on what Russia does, whether the ruble remains stable, doesn't remain stable, does the economy grow or does it not grow?
Yeah, well, the stability of the ruble, I think it was 35 to a dollar. It went down to almost 80. It's back to 58, I think, at present. And it'll keep going up and down. I mean, we've also had other currencies which have had sharp declines occasionally. But let's not forget a couple of things out here. I think, first of all, most important, it is not a big deal that this Eurasian Economic Union has been formed. I agree to that extent on the economic part.
It may not be a big deal just now, but it certainly has potentials.
It has potential in a very long-term context, if you ask me, like the European Union, maybe. But right now, I think there is a certain political veneer to it. But I would not agree up to one point that the only thing they have in common is energy. Maybe for some of the smaller ones to join, Armenia, yes, I can understand. Kyrgyzstan, yes, I can understand. Tajikistan, because it's poor, it needs remittances, etc. But certainly not for Kazakhstan. And Russia does have 2 or 3 things it does not too badly, and it can export. One is certainly oil and gas, but also, and they do that all with India, defense, nuclear energy, diamonds, etc. So may not be much scope for it to expand, but I don't think that there would be such a major change that would result, except if you see, for example, the linkages that are there in terms of rail routes, road routes, etc., at least with Kazakhstan, that is important. And you have to look also at China and others in this context.
We're going to discuss China in a bit. But Ambassador Sibal, how significant is the fact that the second largest post-Soviet Union state, Ukraine in the region, is not part of the Eurasian Economic Union, nor are Georgia, I think Moldova also, and they're looking towards the European Union instead.
Yes. Well, you know, the whole game plan of the West has been to isolate Russia, diminish Russia's power permanently through the expansion of NATO and the European Union. And they've done all these colored revolutions, not only in Ukraine and Georgia, but also in the Central Asian countries. In other words, they are fearful of Russia consolidating the former Soviet space and becoming, again, more than a regional power, which the West doesn't want. So Ukraine has been virtually priced out of the Eurasian Economic Union. And you know that the whole issue started because of EU giving an ultimatum that either you join us or the end of story. Yeah. And Russia came back with a huge offer, $20 billion offer, very lucrative, attractive offer to Yanukovych to not take this decisive step to sign the association agreement with the EU. So this clearly shows you what the geopolitics is at play. I think the fact that Ukraine is not there certainly diminishes the value of this project, and in a sense, the vision of Putin to consolidate the former Soviet Union space under the leadership of Russia, that certainly has been damaged.
Let's talk about China, which you wanted to talk about earlier. Russia and Kazakhstan are the main suppliers of energy to China, which is the largest consumer of energy in the world. Kazakhstan's supply of oil and gas to China have been increasing at a fantastic pace. Between 2012 and 2013, they went up by 14%. Russia signed a huge energy deal with China, and there are plans to link China's northeast with the pipeline and also China's west, Xinjiang, through the Altai pipeline to Russia. Now, if Russia and China are therefore linked both from east and from west, how does that shape Sino-Russian ties?
You see, Sino-Russian ties stand on their own feet. I see them progressing very positively. The Russians are not fearful of China, but they have their concerns about China, and there are two kinds of concerns out there. One is migration-related, but also trade-related. Like everyone else, the Chinese are have a major, it's a major exporter into Russia, and imports very little from Russia in return, despite the oil and gas figures being thrown into the mix. But for China, let's look at this entire region. Now, when we look at it, we call it our extended neighborhood. The Russians call it their near abroad, and the Chinese call it their strategic backyard. And these words have some reveal something about the intentions, that underlie the approach of these three countries to what is going on there. But I think up here again, the main point is none of them would like to see this entire region, that means really these five countries, dominated by a hostile power. And that's what kind of brings at least Russia and China together. The fact that China will dominate commercially and economically in Central Asia has already, it's a fact. And it will happen. Russia has only common borders with one of the states now, out of the five in Central Asia, which is Kazakhstan. It isn't even a bordering state. China is very competitive in any case. And being an immediate neighbor, I don't see who can compete with sending in goods into Kyrgyzstan if you have China with a common border able to export in there. Certainly not the Russians.
We're going to discuss this further in the next segment, but we need to take a break at this point. Stay with us, don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the formation of the Eurasian Economic Union and its consequences. Professor Pant, Russia's central bank and the Bank of China have agreed to bypass the dollar in bilateral debt settlements and payments. Now, with the establishment of the EEU, the ruble will become a critical currency in the region. Similarly, with the coming in of the new Silk Road initiative of China, the yuan will become an important currency along the countries of the new Silk Road. How will the growing influence of these currencies impact the dominance of the dollar?
Zero. I'll tell you why. Take the
Zero,
two
you say?
Yes.
No
I'll
impact.
tell you why. Let me explain. Let me explain economics. Let's not get too excited about the politics. I'll comment on that too. What is Russia's share in world trade? About 2% in terms of imports, maybe in exports, mainly again because of oil, maybe 1 point something in terms of exports. What is China's share? Maybe 10%. Is it now? Where does China sell? Where does China sell? China sells in the US. So what is, let's simple 101 economics. What is the one currency China demands? Dollars. Because they cannot sell in pounds in the US, they have to sell. As long as the dominance of the US in world demand remains, you can keep arguing till the cows come home as to what's going to happen. Nothing is going to change. Let me give simple economics, I must explain.
Quickly.
Very quickly. You see, a currency's dominance is determined not by governments. In the 1930s, the dominant currency in the world market was the pound sterling, not the US dollar. Did someone announce in 55 that now the dollar will be number one? That's simply the way world demand supply is concerned. Next, okay, I want to comment some more on China. Now take about China. Now you say that this China and Russia agreeing to a bilateral deal. When do bilateral currency deals, unlike currency swaps, when do they work? When there's a lot of commonality in demand supply. Where's the commonality? As long as there's shortage, you know the Chinese are hungry for energy and all. As long as they need that, they will agree. But what will they give in return? Can the Chinese convince every trader to supply free of charge to Russia in rubles, which has no value over time? So, you know, these things have no sense. You know, last point I want to mention, coming back to India, since the former Prime Minister's time, they've been talking about the Asian Currency Union. You tell me, where has it gone? Barring the diplomats and the politicians, no one seems to understand what an Asian Currency Union, what it promotes. So, these are matters of economics and world trade. Unless China wants to dealing from world trade, and Russia in any case is not linked to world trade, it will never happen.
Okay. Now, let's leave the currency aspects to the side. Besides the impact on trade and currency, or lack of impact on currency, as Manoj would say, will the Eurasian Economic Union also promote political, military and security cooperation amongst its members? And should the Eurasian Union therefore be understood as yet another blow to US hegemony in the region?
No, let's not get that wrong. You already have the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which already combines these plus Tajikistan. So I would, the creation of this union is essentially economic, even though it might have political tones, because the security and political organization already exists. So this is not going to convert into the CSTO. That already exists. That is not happening. It has happened some years ago. So one has to bear that in mind. And the difference in membership is only Tajikistan, which is why I would suspect that fairly soon you will find Tajikistan joining in. It doesn't have much of a choice. It's a poor country really going nowhere in that sense. You have the 201st Motorized Rifle Battalion located up there, protecting the border with Afghanistan. And you have also the migration aspect and the remittance aspect. So
that's within the former Soviet Union countries. Sibal, but what about China? Do you see this as one more building block of potentially a new world order where a Sino-Russian axis emerges? And would that be in India's interest if it does?
Well, before I reply to this on this currency issue very briefly, I think Putin had this whole idea that United States, because dollar is reserve currency, has a grip on the global finance, which must be diluted. China is also wanting to make yuan as much of an international currency as possible. So I don't think the idea is to replace the dollar, is to weaken the position of the dollar. Whether economically this can happen or not happen, I'm not an economist, I can't tell you, but the political game plan is this. And if they start buying and selling Russian oil and gas, not in dollars, but in some other currencies, that apparently, according to economists, will be a blow to the dollar as a reserve currency. Again, the economists can pronounce on this. I'm not too au fait with the economic part of it. But insofar as Russia and China coming together to form a kind of a strategic bloc of their own, in a sense, the movement is in that direction, especially after the manner in which the United States is treating Russia, trying to isolate Russia, sanction Russia, treating Russia contemptuously, and demonizing Putin, and obviously seeking regime change.
Impact on India if Russia and China come together?
I think it'll be difficult for us because we will lose leverage with both countries. So long as Russia and China had some latent tensions or their bilateral relationship was not as strong as it is today, then within the RIC or even outside that, India could play a role. But once the Russians and Chinese get together closely as they are, and Russia started supplying advanced weaponry to China now, our equation with both countries gets weakened, and we may be thrown a little bit more into the arms of the West and the Americans as a result.
Mr. Malhotra, do you agree with him?
Broadly, yes. I think what Master Sibal has said is correct. Russia and China coming closer together also is not only in our interest. I think also Russia and US getting separated by such a large divide is not in our interest. Okay. And somehow we need to find a way of squaring the circle.
Last word to you.
Well, on this, I would say, I said that in your last program too, a Cold War is good for the world. Because a lot of people like India, a very small country, I wish we realized it one day, would be happy not to have to make a choice. Today the world is such you have to make a choice. I'd be happy, but will it happen? I don't think so. Because let me be very clear about China. They are everyone keeps thinking since 1995 that one day China is going to lead the Cold War. They haven't. In every major, because for them the interest is the economics must go on. Who is the economics linked to? The US.
Okay.
So if the economics doesn't go on, then the domestic politics will happen.
Okay, Manoj, you can keep dreaming about a Cold War, but we have to end the program. I'd like to thank all my guests, Professor Manoj Pant, Ambassador Ajay Molotra, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal for coming here and participating in this discussion. Thank you very much. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another issue. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching.